Hi and welcome to the Dutch PHP Conference 2020 edition. We're so glad that you've chosen to be here with us today. We hope you find it a valuable investment of your time. We've got a great speaker coming up for you, but real quick, I want to give a huge shout out to my buddies at iBuildings for putting on this conference all these many years. I've been involved in this conference since about 2007 when I spoke at one of the first ones and just absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite PHP conferences ever, and one of the main reasons that it's my favorite is that iBuildings puts on a great conference. So Tom, Yoni, and Angela, and all the iBuildings staff, thank you all for all the hard work that you've put into this. Now, it is my great privilege to introduce a friend of mine, Mr. Damien Seguy. He's going to talk to us about the top 10 PHP coding traps. Damien, you online?
So we have the longest session of the day, right? 3 hours.
At least,
right,
yes,
right?
at least.
Yeah, 3. So that's a top 10. Top 10. Actually, I submitted it as the top 64 of PHP coding traps. And then I had a hard discussion about how many I actually should. So we actually have, oh no, that's 45 minutes. So we have to go very fast. So yeah, we're going to do that on a top 10. Hopefully you're going to learn something. I do expect a bunch of you to be realizing that you already have that under control, but believe me, you're going to learn a few things along the way. So please stay with us. If you're not really happy with the one we have, next slide is going to be even more. So keep that in mind. Also, please, in particular, since you're already on the computer, do not fix code now. Okay, learn things along the way, and actually just wait for Monday to actually start using them. But that would be important. As I'm here, I like to process the question along the way. I have kept the question and answer window open, so please use that so I can actually try to answer the question as we are, because we're going to cover so many subjects that, well, it's better to answer that now. If not, that would be outside in the Slack channel, and I will take time to answer everything. So let's go there. So how did I end up with that top 10? Well, I actually run, beside elePHPant, I actually run a static analysis tool called concat. So everything you're going to see here, I've met it in the code somewhere, and sometimes more often than you think. But static analysis tool is just one way to use PHP to actually review code and review a huge amount of code itself. So what I'm talking at the moment, I'm reviewing code. So that's a great. Also, to help you understand what we're going to do today, there are little icons that I have spread across the different slides, telling you if it's just a bug, something that, yeah, it can work, but then it will come back and bite you at the worst moments possible. So always, it's good to put that under control as soon as possible. Performance potential may be extremely deep, or it may be shallow, so depending on your usage. And also the way of the elephant is just something that we do in PHP and not other languages. So just remember that, and maybe you don't like it because you have too many other technologies. So just to start very easily, we're going to start with, I think, one of the most legendary traps we have, which is strpos. So well, maybe we can do that on the chat, but I'm pretty sure everyone has run into this one. strpos is going to look for a piece of string inside another piece of string, and it will return the position of the found string inside the other one as an integer, unless it doesn't return anything. And since the initial position in the string is 0, then PHP will not differentiate between the position 0, something has been found at the beginning of the string, or the string has not been found at all, because it will return 0. So anytime you see strpos that is loosely compared to 0 or null, well, everything between it's at the beginning of the string and it's not found is confused, and everyone will actually end up with the wrong answer. So all the three things you see here is just the strpos alone, or just a comparison with a double equal, that leads to a problem as soon as the A will be at the beginning of the string. I'm sure you know that. I won't go into detail. What are the solutions to that? So the elephant way, the current elephant way is to do the triple equal compare. So you will actually make a differentiation between the position 0 or the Boolean false, which means not found. Now, where this gets a little confusing is that if you are actually doing a comparison with something that is not 0, then 0 and false being the same, then you can actually stick with the old double equal, not the triple one. But then, of course, that makes things a little harder to understand when you want to learn how to code correctly. So the suggestion is just make it triple equal. That's easy. Now, from there, because strpos is the poster child for this problem, you have to understand that it is not the only function that has the same problem. So of course, people usually yell at me, oh yeah, there is strpos. So string, looking for a string without case sensitivity. That's the second one. So you see there's at least two, but usually we try to go and try to understand how many other functions are there that actually do the same kind of ambiguous results. And I'm pretty sure you wouldn't believe it. So usually I start by making people vote how many how many of those PHP functions. And you have to believe it when I say that there are 26 of them, which are actually behaving the same way. So file get content is a very classic one. Also, it will collect something. If it's the result, the file is not accessible, the website is not accessible, it will return null. Otherwise, it may return an empty string. So do not compare directly the result of file get content exactly with null, because you have to do this comparison. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck. The good news, beside the 26 problem, is that at least one of them has been currently solved, because if you switch to PHP 8, and that probably is going to be the main reason for you to switch to PHP 8, is that we're going to have a major upgrade for strpos. We're going to str contain. So str contains. First, it will get this magical underscore. So we actually start to have the actual, coding conventions for the name. And then this one will just return a Boolean yes or no, and no position stuff. Okay, so when you move to PHP 8, you're going to get that. I haven't seen yet if this has an option or an older sister function for case insensitivity. So for all of you who are using strpos, maybe you're still stuck with that. I don't know yet. Maybe someone can tell me, but this is alpha stage. We can ask I don't know, Gabrielle to come up with the extra function that we. Okay, so yeah, PHP 8, that's going to be a big help. And there is another lesser legend of strpos, which is actually I would say worse. But take a look at this piece of code. This is roughly the same as the previous one. We actually take a look at OpenSSL verify. So very simple thing. OpenSSL verify, I don't need to understand what's inside the values, but there's the data you want to verify. There's a signature and there's a public key, and you're going to get, well, you're going actually to get 3 results. You're going to get a result that say, okay, this verifies, fine, or this doesn't verify. That's exactly what we're expecting. And you also get an error. And that's not, what's nice is that now instead of like strpos having the false and the 0 problem because there's the same, now there are 2 different answers. So success is 1, failure is 0, and error is -1. And I'm going to let that sink in a little bit, because you have to understand that from there, success is true, failure is false, and error is also true. Meaning that when you look at the code, just like I've written here, well, basically, if you manage to botch the key or the data or something, and then the OpenSSL fail, then you're going to log in. That works. So that's another effect of this, several type for the same value and PHP doing the juggling type. Would I try to have you guess how many other functions behave the same way? Or is that again too much? I don't know. Okay, let's go there. We're lucky there's only 13 of them and not 26, so it's a twofold improvement. But still, I'm actually surprised by the number of OpenSSL functions, so cryptographic functions that are affected by that, but others might be less important, like ODBC. Anyway, you get those. don't do a direct comparison, because you will probably confuse the error with the actual result. So don't do that. The evolution actually is already underway, because, for example, random hint, which is supposed to provide you with a random integer, then will now throw an exception if it has a problem generating this integer, because of course, random int will have to provide any int from 0 to PHP int max. So it cannot really return a false or something. Now it actually throws an exception, and it will just block the whole script in case there is a problem. OpenSSL said a random pseudo byte is following the same way, so you can expect that in other functions soon. Anyway, no question yet, so I will go on with that, and also try to differentiate very well your errors whenever you call native functions or your own in-house library. Next one, let's switch completely subject and go to something else. That's a performance potential. By itself, it's not a big performance potential, but instead of calling define in particular, whenever you've got literal values like here, hey, and true, do not use define. Define is a function. It's still a function. It's not a structure of language, but just a function. And this will have to wait for PHP to actually execute the code to be, well, parsed, of course, but also executed. So PHP doesn't know anything about this constant until it actually starts running the code. So the solution here is const, and I actually have been surprised by the number of people who do not know that this actual expression can be worked outside a class or interface for that matter, but that can work outside a class. So you can actually use that directly in the main body of the script or the application, and actually get the constant being available. Here, of course, this is pre-compiled, so meaning that you should be able to build the constant before it's actually with all the data before execution itself. So that works. There are some limitations in comparison with define, because define is actually a little more flexible for that. In particular, we do not have the possibility to do case-insensitive constant. Well, again, usually I go with a little survey of who is using case-insensitive constant in his code. And knowing that there's like 500 of you today, you have to know that among the viewers, there are 10 of you who are using that. Okay, so currently, the amount of code that is using case-insensitive constant is 2%. Okay, so again, static analysis helped me survey so many of them, 2%. So it's still in use, but you have to know this is on the way out. So do not expect that to survive PHP 7.4, maybe 8. So that's going to go away. The other one that makes define still necessary is, of course, when you make define dynamic. Okay, so like the second line you have here, where the variable will be created on the fly. So of course, it makes it very strange to have what we call variable constant, because basically that's what you have here, right? Create variable constants on the fly, so they can change from one to the other. Of course, if those are coming from a YAML file or an external configuration, there's no way you can actually guess them behind. That makes sense. But if those are kind of calculated, you also have to remember that there is the notion of constant static expression in PHP. So you can create a constant with literal, just as I mentioned earlier, and then you can also apply anything that is roughly not a function call. Anything that is just an operator will actually be available to you to create and to construct and to rebuild the function. So instead of having 4, let's say, constant that describe your application version, you can just make 3 of them and then build the other one, the last one, with the different previous constant. So you don't have to, you have some kind of pragma and pre-processing into PHP. So keep that in mind. That's always easier and good to pre-program those constants, and that's another way to move out those define calls into something that's really the smallest amount of code in your own application. Now let's move. I don't see any question here yet, so hopefully you understand. Everyone understand that. but use please the question and answer more than the chat. I don't have the window for that. So repeated print, that's another classic one. Now people are using a lot of templating systems, so good for you. You won't have prints, but if you still have, those little scripts, the repeated call to function, well, PHPrint is not a function, we'll see that later, but repeated call, repeated always calling the same function one after the other is usually a performance pitfall. So it's always better to reduce the number of calls. It works with print in particular. Anytime people spot that kind of repeated prints, then they usually say, oh yeah, we just should call one. And then we move to this kind of solution that's actually not much better. What happens here? What happens is that, well, okay, we used to have 3 print, we just have 1, which is better, but then print will say, okay, I will display what is provided to me, A and B, and oh, but A is not alone. I have to first, make that with B, and then it will just do the concatenation, allocate some memory, put A, put B together. Oh, there's another one, so it goes again to C, and then it make a third allocation. Then it displays the whole variable, and then what do we do with this concatenation? We don't need it, so we actually have to deallocate again. So basically, when we're over creating variables for very temporary reasons. Now, that's probably not as acute since PHP 7.3, where the memory has been changing a lot, the memory management, but that still happens. So the best solution is actually to go with echo, because echo, you may not know that, but echo actually accepts a bunch, an arbitrary number of arguments. So here, instead of dots, and maybe you have to zoom on the dot being a comma, but here we're actually providing 3 arguments, and PHP now understands pretty easily that all of them will be one after each other sent to the output, and they will not be concatenated. So we're saving memory here. Of course, on such a small piece of code, yeah, probably you're not going to save much memory, but if you're manipulating a lot, or you're building a template with that, that will probably start to be a high number, and that will be more interesting. Now, if you want to go back, and in particular, you want to keep the first syntax just because of VCS integration, then you can always put the comma just the way it is. Not again, the comma could have been confused with the dots, and now it could be confused with the semicolon. So be careful with that, but you can also go back here. The only piece of advice I have here is that echo is not a function just like print. Remember that? So first, we do not use the parentheses. There is no use for echo in parentheses. It actually leads to even other problems, but do not use the parentheses. And then you're also going to lose the final trailing comma. Actually, maybe for PHP 8, it could be an idea to have an upgrade and be able to have the empty trailing comma for this syntax, but it's no big deal. So as we said, avoiding would sprintf with more? Yes, that would be more interesting. Yeah, that would be because it will do the concatenation once. So sprintf will also include some formatting. So of course, echo will not do that. If you just use printf, to put percentages, that's probably an overkill, because then you have to format something that is actually not formatted. But then, yeah, if you keep it, if you have the extra formatting, that will be interesting. Now, I just mentioned that print here has to be avoided, but here we have got another problem that's kind of the same, because we don't have several call to fput CSV written, but since it's inside a CSV a loop for each, then we have actually a repeated call. And this one is actually pretty slow for one good reason, which is that fput CSV will take an array. So you don't see the array by itself. It's not important in this situation. But you take the array contains rows. The rows are written directly in CSV. So you don't need to do any formatting or preparation or whatever. But you're still calling fput CSV one after each other. And you cannot call it on the whole array because PHP doesn't work like that. So you actually have to lose performance on that. In particular, fput CSV will, what do we say, flush to the disk at every call. So every time you call fput CSV, even if it's a small CSV line, then you will have to write it on the disk. How could we speed that up? I mean, we don't want to skip fput CSV. If you just go to bugs.php.net, go there once in a while. It's always funny because I do report bugs and I always make a fool of myself with that. So at least go there for the fun. But if you go there, there's a bunch of bugs that were reported for fput CSV. So whoever has the idea to put some escaping function of CSV will probably bite his hand soon. So we want to use fput CSV, but also we would like to avoid the number of calls of the flush to the disk. And the solution here is actually to use an intermediate memory representation that we have available in PHP, which is the filter, the protocol called PHP memory. So with this fopen you have on the first line, we can actually open a bunch, an amount of memory, just a blob of memory. And from there, we will just put the for each and push everything there. By doing that, we do not have the same problem as writing to the disk because it's all memory. So the fput CSV is now much, much faster. Now, and for whoever wants to use that piece of advice, please remember the rewind, okay? So we open the pointer into memory, we write all the CSV over there, and then once we're done, we rewind. Otherwise, you're going to end up with the fput file that is nothing but empty, okay? So rewind it. And then we just do the rewrite in one time. And at that point, PHP is a lot faster because at worst, it will fill any buffer it has, or it will fill the disk buffers, but it will just dump everything fast into the disk. As usual, if you try to push 2 GB of RAM, that's going to cost you 2 GB in your PHP script. So, think about it and try to understand if it's really worth using that much memory or writing to the disk. But it actually is pretty efficient even for a few megabytes of CSV, which is probably reasonable. So think about it. That would apply also to large XML files. If you use simple XML and you want to write something, maybe you can write it to a file that is in memory and then dump the file into memory, because that's going to save you a bunch of flash. I just make a little pause, but I see no questions, so I will go on for the next part. So next one, another of those surprising situations in PHP. Here are 2 different lines. Okay, the first line is just for the introduction itself, but we calculate A1 and A2, and I would like you to think a little bit and wonder what is the answer, or what is the result of this script? Well, there's no display, but I guess you can understand that. What will contain A1? And I have just displayed a bunch of options for you to understand. Again, I won't see the chat, so just try to think about it and wonder. I suggest that the answer would be maybe a Boolean, true or false, makes sense. Or it could be a number from 0 to 3, and you've got to understand. And in particular, however they look very similar, A1 and A2 are not going to provide you with the same result. What will happen? Well, as everything in life, everything is a question of priorities. So the operator precedence is not the same between the first and the second line. On the first line, equal has actually a higher priority than and in later form. So what you will end up with is A1 is B, so B will be 3. And then the result of this assignation, which is roughly just B by itself, so 3, will be now logically combined with C for whatever result it is. And we don't care the result, because then PHP will think, okay, there's a logical, here is logical results, which is just a part of a sequence. So no one cares about that. It's not stored. It's not used as a condition or whatever. Just drop it. So in the end, A1 is going just to be B, unless you use parentheses like that. The other one, and that's the trick part, is that the double ampersand will actually be higher priority than the equal. And that's the one that will behave as you expect, meaning that it will first calculate the 3 and 1, get a result, and then push it into B, meaning that you end up with the result you expect. And that's how you end up with those recommendation or those coding convention that, yeah, you should be able to use the symbolic logical operators rather than the letter one, because the letter one do not behave as you expect. Most of the time it will, and I will agree with that. But once in a while, it will bite you, and that will bite you hard. Now, those other matters is kind of interesting because there's a bunch of other quirks that happens in PHP with that. The one that I hate the most is this one, because I just can't read that piece of code. Okay, so again, just X is an object. Who cares about the object? And then we try to check if this object is a standard class object. So very simple. How do you read that? I mean, humanly speaking, I do not understand what I read. I read here that not X being an object. I expect that to be false, and false or true or whatever the result could be there will never be an instance of an object. That's the way I read it. Okay, I understand that there's a bunch of people who can read that and understand that the instance of has a higher priority. That's fine. I know it. I mean, but that's a conscious effort. That's a conscious effort that always, bug me anytime I read that. So I usually add some extra parentheses just to make sure that I understand what I'm writing, because otherwise this is wrong. Now, another situation that happens also with those priority is that until now, concatenation and plus, I will also mention bit shift, but it's less popular, but at least concatenation and plus used to be of the same priority, which means that until PHP 7.4, where it's now deprecated, at least there's a warning, then the concatenation will first happen, and then the plus will happen, dealing with a magnificent 0, or maybe just the value of b, while now in PHP 8, then the plus will have higher priority, so a plus b will happen first, and then the 3 will be added as a concatenation to the other part, so that's going to be nice. Now, if you wanted to use those operations inside a longer concatenation, you probably run into the problem pretty fast, because you try to do that, and then you end up with half of the string that disappears, the second half will just still appear. So you probably learn the hard way that, yeah, you have to put parentheses. But at least that's getting better, and we're going to see that kind of problem disappear. The kind of problem that won't disappear is this one, which is always very funny, I think. But you've got a lot happening here. In particular, well, you see the double star. For those of you who do not use power operator all the time, it's the power operator. So it's just, what you can read it as a human is -3 power 2, okay, to the square of -3. But once you start echoing that, you will end up with another unexpected result. And of course, you will not get the actual result, because this will not display 9. It will display -9. And if you wonder why mathematicians hate PHP, well, that may actually boil down to that problem. But at least what happened here is that in terms of PHP, minus and 3 are 2 different tokens, meaning that when PHP parse the code, it will say, oh, okay, I found the echo, good. I found the minus, but the minus is not -3. The minus stops here because it will be concatenated. I mean, it will be combined with the results of the next expression. That is in particular useful if the next expression, for example, is a parenthesis. Okay, that would make sense. In particular, the parenthesis could include itself variable. So you want to be able to first process the parentheses and then get the result. But here we've got an integer. So the integer has to be concatenated first. I mean, so has to combine first with the minus, but then power has higher priorities than minus. So you end up with 3 power 2, 9, and then the minus is applied and you get -9. Yes, that's weird, right? But hopefully you don't use those. I'm going to finish that with those weird operators with a little fallback on the initial one. That's, if you remember, that's what the potential bug about logical operators. And here I want to mention in particular that we have changed the double ampersand, which is yielding a Boolean, into the single ampersand. And the single ampersand is just a bitwise combination. So it will actually take 3 and R on one, and it will return not an integer, it will return an integer, not a Boolean anymore. In particular, this operator is able to detect the type of both operands, and it will return the same type if both of them are integers or both of them are strings. Meaning that if you combine two strings together, like for example this one, then you will end up with another string. That's actually fairly interesting, because here if you get the A, capital A and P, and then you combine them, then you can actually get 0. Where's the answer? The answer is no. I switch, sorry. No. You will end up with this answer. So that's the 0. You see A and P is 0. And just for fun, I kept the A and I run the same operator on several logical values. And you can see that the result is not even sorted in the right order. Again, it makes complete sense when you see the way we combine logically different strings to end up with numbers. So it makes sense, but it's still kind of fun to realize that this is actually not the right order. So we're doing it completely wrong on that. So I'm going to finish that with actually what I call, a good way to hide stuff. You know, when you don't understand how someone managed to send in an eval or build a web shell on your code, then you try to understand what the hell was used inside this little HTML HTML field to actually put you some PHP code inside. And that's actually valid PHP code. So you've got to take a look at that. If you want to understand the way it works, well, the most important one is, of course, the little caret, the little hat that's somewhere in the middle between the two strings. So you see the $_, there is the Hegel, and there is this caret. So the caret is applying the same operator we have behind. There's no real anything to understand about the string themselves, but once you actually combine them with this tool, you get a $_get. And then from the $_get, then you can actually access the rest of the PHP superglobals and access the $_ or __. And what you get in the end is just this piece of PHP code. So the two of them are exactly the same. From there, you've got a web shell. You can actually create something and use it to open other and do other inclusions. So just have fun. So again, here is a piece of PHP code that is able to fool a bunch of those parameters and filters and still get some PHP inside the place you don't want PHP to be. And again, I took the wrong place. So I'm going to skip that because we're running out of time, and that will be in the slides. But I would like to do something that is more important, a little further, strings about how you can work on them. So please don't go back to the slide once I'm done with that. That's array column. Oh yeah, I have really prepared way too much, as I said. So yes, so I'm going to finish in particular with this one, array looping potential of performance protection. So first one, that's a very classic one, right? Well, who's using for anyway? So for should most of the time, and that's around 90% of the cases, for can be replaced by a for each. And in particular, anything that is a count or a function call in particular inside the increment part of the for should be removed and should actually be moved somewhere outside of the loop, so you don't actually recalculate all the time. Now, there may be situations where the count is useful. That happens, like you're growing an array and you want to stop at based on that growth. But most of the time, the array itself is not changing its size, so you can calculate it once and just reuse the variable. So that's a classic one. It still happens a lot, so don't underestimate it. moving it this way. And when you move it this way, but you still want to update the initial array, then you should use the ampersand. So the ampersand turns the index as a reference, and the reference points to the initial array where you can actually do some upgrade. And when you take a look at the code the way it is, we're actually looping over the array, and every time we have an element, we just make this element into an uppercase string. Very simple and very efficient. Now, still with the loops, and we're going to go back to the original problem. The problem here is how we want to concatenate a bunch of strings. I mean, it's a bunch of arrays. So we have seen the for each. We want to avoid doing those multiple calls inside the count, but here we have a while. So it's made to be very simple. I'm sure you don't use that this way, but basically we're extracting a list from a table. We have to create an array from this list, and then we merge everything into the final array. Okay, so it's just an accumulator. We have a bunch of lists, create them as array, and with that we want to accumulate those into it. Now the thing is, we are repeating the same call on array merge to calculate things in final. And as we had with Sprint, the problem here is that array merge will actually use a lot of memory. And just to explain how it works, then I want to show you this one. So the first, and the one we have at the top is the whole list of arrays. Okay, so it was stored especially in the database, but that's the case. The first time on the first loop, we have an empty final. So we will actually grab the first array, and then PHP will have to reallocate a new larger array, which will include the two first elements, right? And on the second loop, the same will happen, but we have to allocate an array that is larger than the previous element plus the new element we have. And every time we do a new loop, every time PHP has to call array merge, and array merge will actually call again memory allocation and do the duplication of the previous element. When we end up with the fourth loop, we actually have created 4 different temporary arrays, which have been filled and have been copying memory back and forth all the time. Meaning that if your while is a little long, let's say 10,000, you may end up with 10,000 intermediate arrays, which will lead you to memory consumption. So the solution here is just like we did for print, just turn that into one call and not more than one call. But how do we do that? How do we actually call just once? The array merge, just like echo, actually use an arbitrary number of arguments. So the only thing we have is just try to find a way to turn all those lists coming from a database. We don't know how many of them, but all those lists, we actually have to turn them into just one gigantic call into merge. And the best way we can do here is actually using the variadict. So here, compared to the previous one, what happens is there's a temporary variable, which is TMP, which collects and appends all the intermediate arrays. That doesn't hit more memory than previously because we do not create a larger intermediate arrays. We just collect all the arrays we want to merge. And they are all append, so there's no copies. There's just an integer or a pointer probably added to the temporary list. And then in array merge, we use the variadict to spread all those arrays as one argument each. And array merge will say, oh, how many arrays, how many elements? I exactly know how much memory I need. I will do the allocation once, and I will directly copy that only once. Strangely, how it looks, it's actually much, much faster. And anytime you've got more than 2 elements to copy, actually array merge is going to be faster. So always, always think about that. The arrays here have to be merged into one. Now, there may be a little detail where we are here. Maybe you see it, but the append operator, I've used it with a false short array syntax. Okay, the false array syntax, you can see just the TMP inside the loop. It's actually, you can actually put it either on the equal and it makes it look like one of those short syntax, or you can put it on the variable as it's actually shown in the manual. Or you can also put it anywhere you want. And like here, it's not exactly under an operator itself, it's just somewhere in between. PHP doesn't care about the white spaces, so just put it the way you want. Maybe just putting it next to the equal operator will make you look like you know something, but actually it's just PHP white space wizard. So anyway, looping, we've seen looping with concat. Sorry, we've seen looping with array merge, and we can do the same with array concat. I mean, sorry, no array concat, but we can do the same with concatenation. What is the thing here? So compared to the previous table listing we don't have this turning the value into an array, so it's a little easier. We want to collect everything into one long variable. Every time we read one value, we concatenate it, so it's easy. Of course, you could do that on the database. Just be careful that if the result is going to be very large, there's a bunch of databases around. I think MySQL and SQLite does the same, which limits the amount of group concats they accept. So that will probably cut your result at like 30K or maybe a little more. So that's always surprising. That's often the reason why we see those kind of calculation being done on the PHP side, because at least you read everything and then it ends up there. The same problem applies to concat as we had for merge, meaning that PHP will actually rebuild the string all the time, except of course the string is far smaller than an array, so it costs far less. Also, and this top 10 has been around for a while because that was true before 7.3. Since 7.3, the memory management makes the concatenation not move around the string, so the impact will be far less than it is actually. So you can still apply the same optimization. It might probably not be that efficient. Array merge, it's really impressive. Array concat depends on the size, and you probably you have to end up to 10 megabytes of string to actually see an improvement, but that may be worth it if you really have to handle those large arrays. Okay, we can still go on and work on the addition. So here we're like reading a quantity and then doing the addition. So array merge, we could reuse array merge to do that in one call. Concatenation, we had to use implode to concatenate everything into one. If we have addition, what are we going to use? So yes, there is array sum, and no, we don't want to use that. The problem of performance we just have detailed is based on the fact that there is a lot of memory reallocation every time we have to call the operator. For plus, well, plus we have the integer. I mean, we can grow the number up to few billion, maybe more than that those days, but it is completely useful and useless. So here, this is just the most efficient way to do it, and use array sum if you already got the list of values, as a list of elements, but don't use it for here. There's no gain in performance. And you can check, no questions. Good. No questions here. So we're going to finish, I think I have another 3 minutes, just the missing subpattern, because on top of that, it's again something that has been fixed recently. The missing subpattern is when you have a final optional capturing subpattern here. This is the case. So you want to get the A and B, but only B if there is a value. Then the final parenthesis is optional. So when there's actually A and B, you get a full array 0, 1, 2. But if the result, the analyzed string is actually not full, you may end up with a shorter array. And usually we don't want those paired match to return something that is shorter than expected. And I've seen countless pieces of code that are actually wondering why the hell once in a while they get no result for this regex. The thing is, PHP will detect that this final parenthesis is empty, and it will just not bother creating it, and you will end up with a shorter array. Okay, so if you want to fix that, then well, there are different options. Before PHP 7.4, you can and you should actually add an extra parentheses that is always there. And at that point, PHP will always create the intermediate optional parentheses, and then you will always have the same size. For a small option like that, it doesn't really cost much, so it's good. But if you know that in PHP 7.4, we actually have pereg match as null, and it means that you will always get all the parentheses you expect and not less than what you expect. So that would be the good one. So I think I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be kicked off those. And I promised you a top 10 because that doesn't look like a top 10. So I do have a top 10. There it is. Here is the top 10. We've covered most of them. The percentage you see here is how often I actually meet that into PHP code. Okay, so the 4 weeks count, however people know about it, there's like a third of us that are still using it. There's a bunch of questions about next month, the emerging loops, the operator precedence. They all hit hard and they all hit often. So take a look at those. If you want more details about strange patterns that are plaguing your code, there's a whole description of the 500 different analyses we run with Exacat in the index of coding of June. So this is how often you can see them in the code, and that could help you, decide if something is important for you to keep under control. If you want to do to check those, be careful, be aware that there are static analysis tools that are running, that are available. There's obviously the one I'm working on. I know Andre was here to present PHP Stand yesterday. A bunch of those analyses are also available. In this one, PHP Code Sniffer does a number of them. I know Juliet is working, which was talking just before. It's working a lot of those. Use those static analyzer. They will find those bugs that are waiting for you and that will bite you when you don't want. Again, we have no much time, so I skipped a few of them, but I stay here, so feel free to meet me on the Slack and have more details or go into more detail into what I've already presented. And I would thank you very much. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Johnny, also, who gave me this wonderful elephant. And well, thank you also for your time here to listen to all my rambling about strange PHP syntax.
Awesome. Great job, Damien. I love hearing you talk every time. And sadly, you always have way more to say than we have time for. But he will be hanging out in the Slack channel, so please feel free to go over and ask him questions. He's doing an awful lot for the community with his tool, and he has built, he's been part of the community for so long. Like I said, the father of the stuffed elephant. So if nothing else, stop by and say thank you for that. Okay, we got 9 minutes before the last speaker of the day. So get up, stretch, do whatever you need to do, and then be back here at the top of the hour, okay? Oh, go rate your talks. Please give Damien feedback. Go after Joined In, give him feedback on his talk. Tell him what he did right. Tell him what he can do better.